I regret absolutely nothing, but I'm starting to think I need some cheaper hobbies. Satisfy your need for speed with the all-new Viper VP4300 NVMe drive. Featuring blistering fast PCIe Gen 4x4 connectivity, you'll be burning rubber with speeds of up to 7,400 megabytes per second. The VP4300 also includes both an aluminum and a graphene heatsink, so you can choose the one that's right for you, or use one on each side to double up your cooling performance. Available in capacities of up to 2 terabytes, along with 2 petabytes of write endurance, the Viper VP4300 is the ideal drive to help turbocharge your PC. Click the link down in the video description to learn more. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. I've finally done something that I swore to myself I would never do, mainly because I know me and my personality, and that is, I've gone out and spent $287 on a custom mechanical keyboard that I'm going to build from scratch. It's not that I don't like keyboards or have never wanted a custom keyboard, it's just, again, I know my personality and I'm sure this will be the first of many. This all started back just a couple of weeks ago when I reviewed the Marsback M1. This is a fully customizable and programmable keyboard with hot swap switches. And while I wasn't a fan of the linear switches that were included, I did mention that swapping those out, I would probably be more than satisfied with this keyboard. And so I went out and bought a full set of Gateron green switches and have been loving every minute of it. But just like every other person before me that has caught the upgrade bug, I walked over to my other PC, sat down and started typing on the keyboard, and realized just how incredibly spongy those optical blue switches were. While my current daily driver does support hot swappable switches, meaning I could easily swap in a set of Gateron greens just like I did on the Marsback M1, I also just built myself a brand new PC, so why not build myself a keyboard to match it? Let's start then with the switches that I picked up for this build, and that is a complete set of Gateron greens. Reason being is, number one, I absolutely fell in love with them when I installed them on the Marsback M1. And number two, when it comes to using a keyboard, I'm a typist first and a gamer second. So linear switches just really aren't my jam, as I feel I make a lot more mistakes when I'm on linear switches than I do when I'm on tactile switches. And they really don't come any more tactile than these. I bought 3 boxes of 35 switches each for a total of 105 switches, which will be, well, perfect for my 96 key keyboard. Up next are the keycaps. This is a full set of die-sub PBT caps from YMDK, and I chose them for a couple of different reasons. Number one, I think the color scheme is straight fire, and number two is the shape of the keycaps. They're a little bit narrower on top, and I'm hoping that translates into, again, fewer errors when I'm typing on the keyboard. And finally is the keyboard kit itself. Again, this is from YMDK, and I bought it directly off of their eBay store, which I will link down in the video description if you're interested in building a keyboard for yourself. Inside here, I believe is going to be either our backplate or our PCB. Yep, that is our PCB, along with a little bit of RGB. Now, I could have gone with per key lighting, but I opted not to, mainly because I prefer my work desk just to have a little bit of underglow to see when I'm typing in the dark, not necessarily to blind me like the Marsback M1 over here. And that would mean that inside of this box is the keyboard case. I specifically did not open any of this until I started filming because I wanted my first impressions to be genuine, and here we go. Holy that is heavy. This has to weigh 3 pounds or more. Oh my god. Oh wow. Oh, that is beautiful. So I kind of decided to go all out as far as beefiness. This is a solid CNC chunk of aluminum, and holy crap, is that absolutely gorgeous. Oh man. I think I may have outdone myself here. That's incredible. And last but not least, we have the full aluminum backplate as well. And oh man, is that gonna look sweet. I seriously wish you guys could feel this thing. I'm gonna go weigh it. I'll be right back. Are you ready? 3.6 pounds. is what this weighs. Now, when it comes to building keyboards, I am a complete novice, so I am going into this completely blind, which is always the best way to go into a $287 project. But it doesn't look too complicated, and I think I should be able to knock this out in maybe about an hour. So, let's get started. With the introductions out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the build itself. First things first, now that we went through all of the parts and I've got everything on the table, is we're actually not going to start with the keyboard case. That comes last. Good Lord, that thing is still heavy. Instead, we're going to start with the PCB and installing our stabilizers. Now, the stabilizers look like this when they are all done. This is a couple of plastic pegs with a metal bar that runs between them, and they are for stabilizing the shift key, space bar, enter key, the keys that are wider than your standard one single switch. They consist of just a couple of parts, these two plastic pieces. The peg goes in the bottom of this one and looks like this when it's all done. Next up, I'm going to take the stabilizing rod, place it into the back of the stabilizer itself, and then slot it into place. And now this acts as a single piece. There we go. You kind of get the idea where we're going with this. Take another stabilizer, again put the metal rod into it, and click it into place. There we go. So I need one for the shift key, one for the space bar, and one for the enter key, and they install just by snapping into place. So put those two ends in, and then snap them back. I'm gonna put one on the enter key, which is gonna go right there. Perfect. And finally, one on the space bar. That goes together the exact same way. There we go. And if you did it right, you should be able to pull up on one of the switches and have the other one lift with it. Next up, we come to the switches and the mid plate. Now, the mid plate's a little bit interesting because it actually just floats on top of the PCB. What holds it down is the switches themselves. And for that, again, I have a full set of Gateron greens. The switches themselves have two little plastic retaining clips, one on top and one on bottom, and then two gold pins on the bottom, which actually plug into the keyboard PCB. On the PCB itself, you can see these two holes with kind of a gold-black slot inside of them. That is where the key itself plugs into. So we're going to take those two gold contacts and snap them right in. Now, the problem is not installing the switches into the PCB. That is pretty trivial. What is a problem is you have to install the switches first into the mid plate by snapping them into place, and then installing the mid plate and switches down onto the PCB and making sure that all of your pin contacts align properly. For my first time out, I have no idea if I'm doing this properly, but I'm going to install switches into the corners of this mid plate and then try to sync that down onto the PCB, and then hopefully install the switches right on top. So we're going to take one switch there, one switch here in the bottom corner, and one more right down here. And then hopefully we can get everything lined up properly. There's one, there's two, there's three, and there's four. Awesome. I think it's time to get all of our switches installed. That didn't take long to make my first mistake, did it? I'm sure during the time-lapse, a good number of you were probably screaming at your monitors that I missed a stabilizer right here on my backspace key. And you're totally right. I did. Which means now I get to take every single switch back out of this keyboard case, which is a more time-consuming process than putting them in, so I can put that stabilizer back in. Let's get started. And now that the switches and mid-plate have been installed, along with all of the stabilizers, we can move on to the next part of installing the PCB and switches into the keyboard case. And that looks a little something like that. And now it's just a matter of screwing everything together and then installing our keycaps. And unfortunately, these screws are non-ferrous, so they're being a little bit of a pain to actually get down in there. And I think that screwdriver might be a little bit wide. Yep, gonna have to get a precision driver, which was on my desk the whole time. Literally right here. Awesome. Who makes screws that are non-ferrous? Honestly. Like every other screw I own. Yeah, totally. This is a great magnetic tip screwdriver. These? Nope. Nothing. Alright, this will be an adventure. Alright, we are almost done. This thing gets heavier every time I touch it. It is time for my favorite part, and that is putting on all of the keycaps, and then we can finally get to the programming of the keyboard. Now this uses QMK for a keyboard firmware, which is open source and fully programmable in its layout. And I gotta say, I'm getting really excited. So, without further ado, let's get these things open. Yes, my knife needs sharpened badly. Now I'm really excited. Let's finish this thing up. Oh, I missed a switch. Alright, so maybe I underestimated the I should have a keyboard in about an hour. It's about 2.5 hours later, although I did eat dinner in between that time, and there we go. I have never been so pleased with a keyboard that I haven't even turned on yet. This thing is incredible. I went ahead and put the rubber feet on it, even though I don't think this thing would be moving across your desk even without them. This thing is solid as a rock, as it is literally just one giant piece of aluminum. And man, I am just so happy with the fit and finish overall of this board. But the hard work is not over. Now it's time to actually get this thing plugged in and get it programmed, because this is a blank board. It doesn't know what any of the keys on top are yet. And in fact, I did change the layout around just a little bit to kind of suit my needs a little better, as you can do with a custom keyboard. So let's get this plugged in, get the QMK firmware installed, and see what it does. Again, one of the biggest advantages to building your own custom keyboard, outside of just the general aesthetics and feel of it, is you can define your own custom layout. And as you can see, especially here above the number pad, mine is definitely not standard. Let me go ahead and show you the tools that I used and how you can actually program your own layout using some open source software. First and foremost, you're going to need a tool called the QMK Toolbox, and that can be found on GitHub. Links are down in the video description. This allows you to actually flash your custom firmware and layout onto your keyboard. Secondly, you'll need to set up your keyboard layout, and luckily there is a web application that can do just that called the QMK Configurator. First up, you need to tell the program what keyboard PCB you actually have, and in my case, I have a Melody 96. That should load up a layout that looks eerily similar to the keyboard sitting right in front of you, and if it doesn't, you likely don't have the right PCB entered. The one big customization I decided to do, again, was right up here above the number pad, as I didn't really like the layout of the home and page up, page down, and delete buttons. I preferred a little bit more of an intuitive setup, a little bit more similar to a standard 104 key layout. Luckily, modifying that is literally just drag and drop. So we're going to scroll down here to the ANSI key code chart. We're going to grab the keys that we want to add to the keyboard and simply drag them over. So in my case, I have page up and page down right here on the far right side. Then I've got home and end inside of that. And finally, insert and delete. I also rely pretty heavily on media hotkeys in my workflow, and I really don't like having to hit a function button to change the volume. So we can go over to the media keys. I'm going to grab the mute and put it right there, and then we need a volume up and volume down right next to it. Just like that. There are also just a couple minor configuration tweaks to make. For example, my keyboard doesn't have this additional backslash switch right here, so I'm going to make sure that both of those keycaps are programmed as backspace. Down here on the bottom of the keyboard, you can see I have a couple function keys. In fact, these are called layer modifiers. And if I go over to the layers menu and click on layer 1, if I held in the function key, you can see I have a variety of different settings I can adjust. For instance, I've got brightness up and down, hue, saturation, and RGB mode that I can toggle on the keyboard. Now, one of the things that I noticed going from layer 0 to layer 1 is actually they inverted my mute and volume up and down keys. So I'm going to make sure that those are in the same exact layout that I set on my main setting. So I'm going to go mute and then volume up and volume down. Looking at the app, media, and mouse menus some more, you can also set it to open some commonly used programs. For example, I access my PC quite frequently for getting into my network shares. So I'd like to have a shortcut to that on my home button, so function and home will now open up the My PC window. And for the moment, I'm only going to set up one function key. I want the other one to be my right control. So I'm going to grab the right control button and drag it right on top. Now, I did notice one other very small problem with my keyboard layout, and that is that my enter and backslash buttons were actually reversed when I applied my firmware. So I actually need to take my enter button and put it up there, and my backslash and put it down here. And now I should have a fully working keyboard layout that I can flash onto the keyboard. And if everything looks good to you, go ahead and name your keyboard layout. So I'm going to type in Melody 96-craft. Behind where my beautiful face normally sits, there is a compile button. Go ahead and click on that. And when that's all finished up, you should be able to download your custom firmware by clicking this button right here. With your firmware downloaded, it is finally time to flash and test out your new keyboard. And doing that is pretty darn simple. First up, go ahead and plug in your keyboard. Then you need to set your keyboard into flash mode, and luckily there's a little hole on the bottom of my keyboard that leads to a button that I hold in for about 2 seconds. and that switches it into flash mode. And as you can see on my QMK toolbox, it detected my ATmega32, and we are ready to flash. Go ahead and click the open button and then browse to your downloaded hex file. And then if everything looks good, go ahead and click on flash. After just a few seconds, your keyboard will automatically disconnect and reconnect to your computer, and you should be ready to test everything out. So I'm going to open up a notepad window and just give my letter keys a quick scrubbing through. And if everything functions as expected, you should be all set. So I've been spending the last couple good lord, that thing's still heavy. The last couple hours going over this keyboard, making sure the layout is exactly the way I want it, and overall just playing around with it. And I'll say, I think I knew how much I would love this process, but I didn't expect how much I would love this process, because I'm already thinking of my next keyboard build now. So if it wasn't obvious to you, this is definitely the most amount of money I have ever spent on a keyboard at $287. I think the next closest I came was a Corsair K70 with Cherry MX Browns for $160. So, building your own custom keyboard is definitely not for everyone and can be price prohibitive. But the overall process was not that difficult, and there are certainly some advantages to be had in both ergonomics and customizable layouts. But what do you guys think? Is $300 just too much to spend on a peripheral, or are you like some of my friends who would gladly drop even more? Let me know down in the comments below. On your way down there, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing to keep up with my daily shenanigans, and if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in my newly found keyboard addiction, follow the links down in the video description to my Patreon or Float Plane. As a bonus, you'll get exclusive access to my Discord server, where you can chat with myself and the other hosts from Talking Heads. This project was a little bit different for me, but a heck of a lot of fun, and I hope you guys enjoyed the ride as well. As always, thank you all so much for watching this one, and I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys.